Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel. Here we are still trying to figure out what government will we have, or will we have a government without another round of elections? Well, today, once again, I will be speaking with a favored guest on the political front. That is Jeremy Sultan. Jeremy is the Director of Operations for the Yamina Party. That is with leader Naftali Bennett. He is a political consultant for Naftali Bennett. So are we going to hear some information from him about Naftali, where things are going? We're going to find out. And he is number 15 on the list for Yamina. So right now I think they are 7 seats. Will one day he be in the Knesset? Don't know. Maybe one day, this Knesset, the next one, we're going to find out. All right, before we go live and talking to Jeremy and getting into all this information and figuring out a government, just give you a little background. First of all of you know, censorship is growing on social media. The best way to continue receiving our videos about Israel and the freedom-loving world is to go to our website, pulseofisrael.com, and sign up for our newsletter. Another great way to support Israel is by helping us support the building up of Judea and Samaria. So I'm going to be putting a link, and just click on the link in order to find out how you can very simply help us, help support Israel, support the freedom-loving world by supporting the building of Judea and Samaria. And finally, another great way to connect with Israel is our virtual online video packages and activities about Israel on israelisbeautiful.com. So 3 really, really simple ways to help Israel, connect with Israel, and support our work. All right, let's bring on Jeremy Sultan. Shalom, Jeremy. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you, Avi?
Very well, thank God. Home and in a home office and healthy today. So we're exciting times. I'm sure there's more excitement for you than us. I mean, for us, we're just sitting back and waiting. What's going on? We just get the headlines. What's fake news? What are spins? What's really going on? We have no clue. You are closer to the action than we are. So what can you tell us of what's going on? Because again, the only way Netanyahu can have a 61 government is if it's the Likud, the Haredi parties, the religious Zionist party, Yamina, and Saar's party, which is a very, very big if, whether Yamina and or Saar would want to join that, or with Yamina and the Islamic Party supporting from the outside, giving Netanyahu 61, which a lot of people are like, no way, that is horrible. How can a right-wing nationalistic government rely on a party that has supporters of terrorism, and they've supported terrorists and they welcomed terrorists returning home just 2 weeks ago, an Israeli Arab terrorist who was released. What's going on? What can you tell us, Jeremy?
Well, like I said, it's great to be with you and have a good opportunity to talk to all your viewers and listeners today. I'll start by saying that, you know, I look at social media and it sort of reminds me of the old saying that we have in Israeli politics: those who know don't speak, those who speak don't know. A lot of misinformation, a lot of fake news. Again, as you pointed out, someone who's sitting closer to the action. The stuff that I'm reading is just completely ridiculous. I've also seen people with some pretty solid reputations go out on a limb and say a lot of things that have no basis in truth. And it's unfortunate, but that's why I think it is important, even if I can't go into all the details, to go out and put out, you know, whatever information can be put out during the entire sausage-making process that is not pretty. But what I would recommend...
Before you continue, I just wanted to give another piece of introduction for people to understand the situation. Those who are not, don't know even high level what's going on. There is also a lot of frustration and anger, according to whatever information is out there, if it's true or not, at Naftali Bennett and the Yamina Party, playing around as if he would set up a left-wing government, as he, the leader of a 7-person party, would potentially be a prime minister for a party that everyone else is basically center-left, which would basically be a left-wing government. So that's also a lot of frustration that's going on in terms of the news items. So go for it.
Yeah, so what I was going to say, and it connects into that, is that what I suggest people to do is to pay attention to what people actually say, what they go on the record and say. You know, Naftali Bennett, since the president's residence, has had, you know, 2 opportunities to speak before the faction meetings this week and last week, where he did go ahead and, you know, make public statements. I'm happy to clarify, you know, some of the stuff that he said. But basically, what I see that happens a lot, I get this, people send me a WhatsApp or an email or message one way or another. They'll be like, look at this headline. Stuff that say sources said, you know, there's a reason why no one is putting their name behind it. A lot of times it's part of the game. It's people who are trying to either push a certain narrative. It's people who are trying to perhaps push a certain option that they want to see. And for sure, with Bennett being very key to whatever coalition is going to be formed, I don't think I'll rephrase, it's safe to say there's no chance at any coalition without Bennett in it. So given that fact, you're going to have a lot of pressure from a lot of the people from whichever camp, whether it's the Bibi camp, the Lapid camp, or other competing camps, to try to go ahead and make sure that Bennett plays into their narrative and that there's as much pressure as possible. Now, of course, we don't have to say, you know, Naftali is a former Sayeret Matkal guy and a former commander of forces within the Lebanese war, the Second Lebanese War, and of course is a high power, you know, high tech executive. He knows what pressure is. Of course, a former defense minister as well during quite a few operations, both known and not known. So I don't think that anyone who thinks that any of this pressure is going to change his opinion is going to change his opinion. What he said, and this really set the frame after we all got more or less the election results with the exit polls that came out right after, you know, 10 p.m. when the polls closed after the election day, is he said that, you know, what he's going to do is do what's best for Israel. And that really has been what he's been doing ever since that point. And I can personally attest to that fact. Now, what I want to try to do here today, Avi, is I want to talk about the 3 options that Netanyahu has to form a government. I want to talk about all the possible scenarios, since, again, there are a lot of people talking about scenarios that just don't exist, or they're not talking about, you know, potential scenarios that exist. So there are 3 mandates. I know we've talked about this in previous elections, but I think it's important to do a refresher course, and also to put this within the frame of what is Rivlin going to do? Because as president, it's really his decision that will end up guiding the rest of this process if the first mandate, which Netanyahu has, does not work out. In terms of what happened in the president's residence, if we have time, I'm happy, Avi, to go back to that, explain the 3 reasons of why it was that Yamina did nominate Naftali Bennett for prime minister, and talk a little bit more about the inside baseball there. But I think it's very important that people have a clear understanding of what are the paths for Netanyahu in this current first mandate to form a government. If he does not, what does that mean? And that gives people context for a lot of decisions that are not just being made by Naftali Bennett today, but being made by everyone across the political spectrum, knowing what the potential scenarios are that could follow. So unless you have anything else, I'll just dive right into it.
Oh, dive right in. That's what everyone's waiting for.
All right. So there are 3 different ways that Netanyahu can form a government. He has the 52 nominations of the Likud, Shas, UTJ, and the religious Zionist parties. All 52 of those MKs nominated him in the president's residence. That's why Rivlin gave him the first crack at being able to form a coalition. It's important to understand that as the mandate, he has the exclusive power to be able to form a coalition. No one else has the legal authority to be able to form one except for Netanyahu at this time. So, you know, how do you get from 52 to 61? What Naftali Bennett said at the faction meeting yesterday, and this is very significant, and again, I've heard many different people try to interpret it one way or another. What he said yesterday, again, in public, is that if Netanyahu is worried or whatever it is, that he can count on the 7 fingers of Yamina to get him from 52 to 59. That, again, as we said, and this was our pledge throughout the election campaign, Yamina will do whatever is possible to avoid a 5th election. That was our pledge to our voters. That's why we didn't choose the Bibi camp or the not Bibi camp. And that leaves you in the situation that we are now, where he said from the 52, you can go up to 59. Already yesterday was the third time that they met. They're meeting again today. This is already the fourth time. They might even actually be meeting as we're speaking. The fourth meeting now between the two of them. This is, of course, after months of absolutely no contact between the two of them. You understand that there's a serious process that's going on here. And as Bennett said, he's going to do whatever he can to try to be able to form a government. Now, 52 to 59 is great, but how to get from 59 to 61 or above? So there are three ways to do that. The first way is, the option that you mentioned at the top, which is to convince Gideon Sa'ar and his party to go ahead and jump in. If they go ahead and do so, along with their 6 seats, you have a 65-seat coalition. Some people are calling it a 63-seat coalition because that's going on Smotrich, who Smotrich said that it's a technical bloc with Noam and with Otzma, both being led by Avi Maoz and Itamar Ben-Gvir, 2 1MK parties. So if we take Smotrich at his word that he's only bringing in his 4 and not the entire 6, right, in this scenario, so you would have, instead of 65, it would most likely be a 63-seat coalition. This also goes in line with a lot of the things that were said by people within Gideon Sa'ar's party, especially Benny Begin, who said that he wouldn't sit with those two satellite parties, if you will, within the religious Zionist list.
And just to clarify, yes, for those people who might not have the detail, this party you're talking about, Gideon Sa'ar's party, the New Hope, Tikva Hadasha party, they are all ex-Likudnikim, all who worked with Netanyahu in the past. Very same exact ideology. They are the most basic and best fit to sit together in a right-wing nationalist government with Netanyahu, yet the challenge is very, very big to accomplish that.
So yeah, I think, though, it's important to go ahead and take the 6 MKs that got in. Of course, on their list, they had additional outgoing MKs that didn't end up getting elected to the Knesset. But if we take the 6 of them, I divide them to 3 and 3. You have Gideon Sa'ar, Sharren Haskel, and Zev Elkin, who were Likud MKs in the last Knesset. They were part of the last government. Zev Elkin, of course, was a minister in the last government. He was the minister of water and higher education. That was literally his job. And the other 3 are a little bit different. You have Benny Begin, who's a former Likud MK, but who is already for several elections not voted for the Likud. You have, of course, Yoaz Hendel, who was an MK in Yalon's Telem party, and then Gantz's party, and then Derech Eretz, and now he's in Gideon Sa'ar's New Hope party. And of course, Hendel, he worked with Netanyahu, as you mentioned, just as Benny Begin worked very close. He was part of the security cabinet for many years. But Hendel, again, is a legislator. The last 4 elections has not been associated with the Likud at all. If anything, he's been associated with the other camp there. And the last one is Yifat Sasa Biton, who was an MK in the Kulanu party for the last few elections. And Kulanu did run on a joint ticket together with Likud in the last few elections, but she was very independent, and she split off after she took over Kulanu leadership after Moshe Kachlon retired, for those of you who remember that name, Moshe Kachlon. And she ended up taking the Kulanu party and bringing it along with, Yoaz Hendel, his Derech Eretz party. Both of them brought their parties together with Gideon Sa'ar. So yes, it's true that there are all people who previously voted Likud in the past and so on and so forth, but you can split those MKs, 6, 3 and 3 between 3 who were just, 5 minutes ago, if you will, and the Likud party, and 3 of them of people who have just been elected or, associated with other parties for much of the last 2 years, if not more, going back. So that being said, I don't see this scenario being very realistic. As someone who knows all 6 of those people on a personal level, I don't see that happening. Gideon Sa'ar, his animosity towards Netanyahu is very high. I think people underestimate the amount of hatred that he has. I think also there's a misconception that a lot of people think that a majority of Gideon Sa'ar voters are former Likud voters, just simply because in the last election, Likud had 36 seats, they dropped to 30, and Gideon Sa'ar has 6 seats. So sort of people figured Gideon Sa'ar took the 6 seats of the more liberal type people in the Likud out of the Likud, based on exit polls and also based on our own polls and looking at a lot of indications. The great majority of their voters are actually former blue and white voters, meaning they might have voted for Likud again, 10 years ago, 7 years ago, but they've not been voting Likud in the last number of elections. You can't count them as former people of the Netanyahu camp, and that also gives Sa'ar a lot more leverage, right? I hear a lot of times in the news people say, well, Gideon Sa'ar's voters want him to go ahead and join a Netanyahu government. It's true that these MKs, and again, I know them all very well, are very much right-wing on a lot of the issues. I disagree with Benny Begin, for instance, on judicial issues, but then again, so does Gideon Sa'ar. You just have a situation where they feel very strongly that there is no imperative for them to go in. If anything, if they do join a Netanyahu government, they might be ending their political careers by doing so, in perhaps their hopes, or within whatever scenario. If we do go to a 5th election, had they said yes to that initially, or if they do say yes to that and then everything falls apart, they could end up in a lot of trouble. Of course,
interesting, because there's the other perspective as well. Those people saying, well, if they allow a Lapid left-center government with the Arab parties who are very anti-Israel, then that would end their political career and they have no future. So it's interesting.
So again, I hear that being said, but remember, these are people who voted for blue and white for the last 3 elections before this, and instead of Benny Gantz, they decided to go to Gideon Sa'ar because it was already clear there wouldn't be someone going head-to-head with Netanyahu, and people could go sort of more ideologically. And a lot of blue and white voters, again, if you're looking at those 6 seats, about 4.5, close to 5 of those 6 seats are blue and white voters. So these are people who were okay back when Benny Gantz was running, with the thought that there could be this situation of the Arabs supporting from the outside already. Again, we know them, Avi, as the politicians that they are. I'm quite frankly, I'm always surprised when I see these type of situations where people are voting much further to the right than their actual political positions. But I'm saying that then you're in this situation, if you're one of their MKs, where they're not sure what to do, because let's say they would want to go ahead and join what I believe every right-wing ideologue would like to see, which is a strong right-wing government in which a majority of the right-wing issues has a consensus in a way that we haven't seen before, right? If we look back at the 2015 to 2019 government.
That's the tragedy of the situation. For the first time in a long time, we have that opportunity, and it might not happen.
Right. So the question, though, again, is Gideon Sa'ar going to play the same role that Kachlon did between 2015 to 2019, in which back then Kachlon had 10 instead of 6, but is he going to play that role of saying, I'm going to hold us back in terms of a lot of things, if that's judicial reform, if that's various things that have to do with, increasing settlement housing. And let's just remember where Kachlon was on the spectrum. He was very much to the left economically. He was very much to the left on judicial issues. He was very much, okay. At the beginning, you have to remember this was the second term of the Obama administration, when Kachlon was in that sort of place where sometimes he was with Netanyahu and sometimes he supported the Zionist Union under Herzog, who I'm sure we're going to talk about later if we talk about the president option. But you have a situation where if Gideon Sa'ar is going to do that anyway, because again, we're in a position where his voters, just like the Kachlon voters, really it's the same voters. And again, for Yifat Sasa Biton, who was a minister and was an MK in Kulanu from 2015 onwards, right? She's sort of continuing, that element that we shouldn't just go ahead and pretend that, Gideon Sa'ar is going to be no different than Bezalel Smotrich or Naftali Bennett on right-wing issues here. He does have nuanced positions, and that's important to remember. But I'm saying this one scenario, and we're spending a lot of time on it because I know this is, the one that a majority of right-wing voters want to see. I'm going into this detail so you understand that this is just not a viable option. It's not going to happen.
So let me ask you this, and again, while giving background information for people to understand, like some people might be asking, wait a second, why are all these players making it so hard? I mean, obviously, there's always coalition politics, there's always negotiations till the last second, but this is a much harder situation than ever before when parties and potentially natural partners for a right-wing nationalistic party, nationalistic government, are basically not just playing hard to get, but giving a big no, we're not going to sit with you. And for people to understand, there is a lot of distrust and animosity towards Netanyahu, which he's earned, even with him being a great leader in many, many ways. He's earned this mistrust by some of his partners who he's worked with in the past. So, from my understanding and working off of you, it might be very hard to have this natural right-wing coalition of parties that are over 60 for a coalition. Can it be, and I'm just asking you again, you're not going to tell me anything you can't say, can it be that Gideon Sa'ar and Zev Elkin, both people who worked very closely with Netanyahu, them playing no, we're not going to sit with Netanyahu at all, playing this till the last second, understanding the only way there can be a right-wing nationalist coalition without Lapid on the left is if Netanyahu steps down and is moved to the president's residence, that they're playing this out strategically till the end to try to move Netanyahu so then they'd be able to set up such a coalition? Because they said even before the elections and after the elections, they're not going to sit with Netanyahu at all. Can that be a strategic play? It's in play at the moment?
So, look, I'll tell you that some of the most creative ideas that I've heard in terms of how to resolve the issue has definitely come from Gideon Sa'ar's party. I'm not going to say specifically from who, but they come up with a lot of creative solutions. And again, I think to be able to understand some of those things, it's important to understand all three options Netanyahu has, all of the different scenarios in terms of how the mandate happens, and then maybe you'll understand their strategy a little bit better. So I will answer that, but I'll answer that a little bit later, if you will, just so that you get the full picture and you'll get a better understanding of where it is that they're coming at this. Again, this hour that we're doing, that we're talking, it's not for people with just basic understanding. This is a very complex situation. So again, it's going to be a complex talking about a lot of very different things. But again, if you want to be one of those people on social media who wants to be educated and understands what they're talking about, I suggest that you tune in instead of some of the stuff that I'm just reading that's just, if you'll excuse me, just complete crap. Okay. But yes, just I'll say, at this point that they're looking at various scenarios, and because of the way the system works, they don't have to be in a rush. So we'll get back to that point, a little bit later. I'll just say one last thing. It's possible, by the way, that Sa'ar says okay, but then, like I said, he says we need to get rid of those two guys within Smotrich's technical bloc. And then Smotrich says, well, I said it was a technical bloc, but actually I don't want to get rid of them now. I'm very happy with my showing of 6 seats. And then you have a new issue, meaning, Smotrich is, even though he said beforehand, we're still not completely sure, Smotrich is happy to say goodbye to Ben Gvir and to Avi Maoz, and to then just agree to go down from a 65 to a 63. Also, if that happens, what's this going to look like with two MKs on the right outside of the government? Is it going to be sort of the 2009 scenario that we saw back with Ben Ari, Eldad, Ketzel, and Uri Ariel? Is it going to be sort of the Rechavam Ze'evi scenario, which we saw from 96 to 99 during Netanyahu's first term? And by the way, Netanyahu was the first person to come up with the idea of having this sort of, support from the outside with the security net from right-wing parties. Traditionally, that's been something with left-wing parties or Arab parties. But this is something that Netanyahu did in his first 2 governments, again, both in the 90s and his first one after returning to power. Going into the second scenario. The second scenario, which you also mentioned, is a scenario where Ra'am, the United Arab List, led by Mansour Abbas, for people who are following the news, he was the guy who was supposed to be the kingmaker, who then didn't nominate anyone in the president's residence. So this is the guy who is, of course, the head of the Islamic Front here in Israel, associated with Hamas, associated with the Islamic Brotherhood. It's a lot of people are shaking their heads trying to understand how this is even possible. I've had quite a few conversations with Likud MKs, past, present, some of their pundits, their talking heads, their journalists, affiliated friends, if you will, since we all know there are quite a few of those. And it's very, very difficult for me to see this, personally, this situation where they are sort of trying to pave the way and legitimize and all this type of thing. Look, just wait for the first time that we have to respond to rockets coming from Gaza and see what ends up happening in the first, no confidence motion. So I really don't think this is something that's viable. Smotrich jumped up ahead of this and said, this isn't something that's going to happen. I can tell you again, Netanyahu has sent plenty of people. If it's rabbis, if it's other family members, even I've heard of Smotrich that have been sent to him. Netanyahu is very much putting a lot of pressure on Smotrich on this issue because the thought process is pretty simple. Bennett has not gone out and said that he supported this, but if Smotrich says yes, then how is Bennett going to look by going ahead and saying, no?
Right.
If Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, say yes to this type of situation. But again, like the first scenario, I feel the second scenario is very difficult to believe. I know personally members within the Likud who are really having a very big issue with this as well. I just don't think it's viable. I know it's something that's being talked about. I talked about this at the time, not on your show, but on other shows, that a lot of people are putting a lot of focus on Mansour Abbas, right after the election. I said in the end, he's going to be, in the end, he might not nominate anybody. In the end, I don't think he is going to be this kingmaker. And whatever coalition you're trying to build with him, it doesn't seem, based on any of the numbers, that this is something that's going to be possible. So I think it's a very important thing to keep in mind. The third option is the option of defectors. This is the one that Netanyahu talks about the most. I used to see this a lot in the news. People are talking less and less about it. I think mostly because they've understood a lot more of the legal background. The way that it works is, unless you split as a third of a faction, or if you are a separate existing party. One example is Yoaz Hendel, his Derech Eretz party is, separate from New Hope. He could break away without any issues, similar to how Sasa Biton broke off, from the Likud Kulanu, joint faction, because she had a separate party. The same thing with Orly Levy with her Gesher party. So if you have a separate party, you can go ahead and do that, but otherwise you need a third of a faction. If you don't, you're stuck, meaning even if Netanyahu wants to give you a ministry, if you're in a different party, he can't do that. If you do decide to go against your party and vote with the coalition, what ends up happening is you go through a process which ends up with you not being allowed to run in the next election. The sanctions are very severe. So if you look at situations where you did have people who did cross sides, they had to act very quickly. Gadi Erkan, from the blue and white Ethiopian MK, he did that very quickly, and then he dropped out and then went to the Likud list. We saw that also with other MKs throughout the term. There's not a lot of maneuvering room here for that situation of defectors. Is it possible that people say they're going to retire anyway? They don't care about politics anymore. They've had enough, and they're just going to go ahead and allow Netanyahu to form a government and then deal with the sanctions of not, running in the next election. Most likely people who wanted to retire within the last 4 elections found a opportunity to go ahead and do so. I think I mentioned this before, but my favorite story was Yitzhak Vaknin, who was appointed as he said he wasn't going to run for the 21st Knesset, before we had the first election in 2019. And we triggered in 2019, but it was the beginning of 2020. In 2019, he became a minister, just as a caretaker minister. And until they formed the 3 governments, until Gantz ended up taking over, he ended up spending over a year as an interim minister after he had already retired and gave up his Knesset seat. Just so you understand some of the, situations of these retirements taking so much longer. Of course, Benny Begin, who had, retired at that point of the, the end of the 2019 term, he ended up, now coming back from retirement after taking 2 years off. So there's a lot of funny stuff with that. Basically, the defector situation, we can talk about as much as we want. This is just not a very viable one to see actually happen. Some of the creative ones that I've seen for those who want to see how this could potentially happen. So I said Hendel has one seat. He could break off. You could have a situation where, let's say, Yair Golan with his Independence Party, breaks off, or Ben Gvir or Avi Maoz or whatever it is. I don't think any of these things are very realistic. Right. I think a majority of people understand out of the three scenarios, this is the least realistic, and I decided to rank these three in this order for this specific reason. So, okay, so if Netanyahu can't do it, and based on what I said, it does not seem like he's going to be able to do it by the time his 28, days finish. What happens? So at the end of this time period, Netanyahu needs to go to President Rivlin. And Rivlin has four options. He has four options of what he can do. The first option is the easiest, and that is to extend the mandate. He's allowed to extend the mandate up to 14 days. He can play games as he's done in the past where, he extends it, 1 day, and then another day, and then another day, like create a situation where, Netanyahu needs to report every single day to him, right? He can do that for up to 14 days, or he can be nice about it and just give him, 14 days straight up and say, you have 2 weeks, I'll see you, and then at 2 weeks, I'm going to give you as much time as you want, right? But that all comes out of the first option of we're going to extend the mandate. Now, why would he do something like that? For instance, if, let's say, Gideon Sa'ar shows now he's willing to come down from the tree, if now Smotrich says, maybe I'll sit with Ra'am, you have all these different type of things that could happen, which could end up giving a reason for Rivlin to extend it further. The second option that Rivlin can take, and by the way, if the first option exhausts itself after 14 days, there's no more extensions, meaning, that then Rivlin has three options, if right. You will, right? That's only something that works at the end of the 28 days. So right. What's the second option? The second option is for him to go ahead and say, I am going to hold consultations. I'm going to get everyone together, just like I did before I gave out the first mandate, and I'm going to ask everyone who it is they're going to choose. Now, what is the logic of doing this? There are two different reasons to do this. Number one, for the first time ever in Israel's history, there were three candidates for prime minister. So if in the previous elections, when it came to the second mandate, he didn't need to choose who the second mandate was, there were two candidates. One didn't do it, he'll give it to the other guy. Here, he needs to make a determination between the two candidates that were given to him. So one reason to go ahead and have consultations is to ask, hey, Shas, who do you prefer, Lapid or Bennett? Most likely they say Bennett. UTJ, Smotrich, Likud. Most likely you're going to have a situation where suddenly Bennett might even have more than 61 nominations, frankly, in this type of a scenario, where that same block of the 65 seats that we talked about beforehand, Gideon Sa'ar didn't end up recommending anyone in the president's residence. You could have a situation again where you do see actually a right-wing government in terms of nominations, just that's with the Bennett candidate, even though Lapid ended up with more nominations beforehand. A second reason is for Rivlin to go ahead and say, look, Likud, is there somebody else besides Netanyahu? Because the second mandate cannot be given to as the first mandate. So in the second mandate, who do you want to give it to? Do you want to give it to someone else in the Likud, maybe? And the Likud delegation at that point can float a new candidate. Okay, so on one side, having consultations allows the parties who had chosen Netanyahu to make a decision. Also, the parties that abstained and didn't choose between the three candidates, such as Gideon Sa'ar, have a chance now to choose. And it gives the opportunity for the Likud to choose a new candidate should they decide to do so. Okay, so obviously, what would most likely happen out of that scenario, the highest probability, I would say, is that Bennett gets the most nominations. Right, I don't expect Lapid to go up from the 45 nominations he has. Bennett's going to get more nominations.
Even if Likud gives another name?
So I'm saying you could have a situation where Likud gives another name. If Likud gives a number, so I say there are two ways it can go. One is that there is no other name, and then Bennett has a very good chance to get the mandate. He's for sure going to have more than 7 nominations in this scenario, but I'm saying he'll probably have more than 45. You know, he might even get over 61, depends on the Likud or not. But I'm saying even if Likud abstains, it's very likely that the Haredim and Smotrich don't want to see a Lapid-led government, and giving the mandate to Bennett would prevent that type of situation. Again, whether Bennett succeeds or not succeed, you know, that's a separate issue. The question is who would get the mandate. So they wouldn't want Lapid to have the mandate. That would be too dangerous to them, even as a chess match in terms of a blocking scenario. It makes sense for them to go ahead and choose Bennett, even if they would sit with him or they wouldn't sit with him, just so Lapid doesn't get the chance. The other option, like I said, is if Likud chooses someone else. If Likud chooses someone else, does Gantz suddenly come back into the picture? Does Lieberman start to come back into the picture? That could open things up in a way which potentially, again, it would depend who the Likud candidate there would be, where you could even have a government of over 70 MKs, close to 80 MKs perhaps even over that. If we look at the political map today, and I do think there's a big difference between Lieberman and Gantz compared to, let's say, Labor and Meretz. The spectrum, is not so bad in terms of the right-wing map these days, and that scenario could end up breeding something. But let's say this. Rivlin has said he doesn't want to do that. He doesn't want to go to another round of consultations. The third option of the 4 is that Rivlin doesn't open up that door, meaning he might decide that he doesn't want to give the Likud a chance to be able to choose a new candidate, and that he doesn't want to also go through the route of the consultations and putting himself through that. Anyone who watched the entire day and night where Rivlin spoke to all 13 delegations, right? In the last Knesset, we had only 8 Knesset lists get elected. That was the least of all time. This time we had 13. So we had to listen to all 13 of them. You could see him throughout the day getting more and more frustrated. So I don't know. He could say, I don't want to put myself through this again. I have the discretion anyways. And he can choose to give the second mandate to either Bennett or Lapid based on the fact that he has now the discretion as president to do so, even without going to additional consultations. And again, previously, that's what he's done. It's very, very rare. He's never done this. It's very rare if there is going to be a second mandate to do additional consultations. Like I said, we're in a situation where you had 3 candidates receive nominations for prime minister, so it is very, very complicated. The last scenario, which is the 4th scenario that could happen, and this is what Rivlin said he's leaning towards, if you listen to the speech in which he gave the first mandate to Netanyahu, and that is to say, guys, I'm near retirement. I'm sick of you all. I don't see any chance for anybody to do anything. As we like to say in Hebrew, azvu oti, and just give up on the second mandate and bring it over to the Knesset. I personally think that that's a very dangerous thing for him to do. The reason I say that, and you'll
clarifying for people, meaning giving then the 120 members of Knesset to then on their own have a vote to decide who should be 61, who has 61 votes to try to have the next mandate. Meaning he's giving up his role of choosing that second mandate and giving it over to the representatives of the people.
Right. So again, what he's saying is it's 3rd and long. The clock is going. He's just going to punt it to the other team. Okay. What he's saying is I'm going to, as you said, I'm going to move on to the 3rd mandate. I'm going to give up the entire pleasure of deciding, am I going to extend it to Netanyahu? Am I going to do consultations? Am I going to give the second mandate to someone? It's important also to point out, when it comes down to the second mandate, there is no extension, meaning the amount of time that he's given for the second mandate, that's what's given, and that's it.
So why is this the most dangerous that you were saying?
I'm saying it's the most dangerous because in the third mandate, and we'll get to the third mandate after we finish discussing the second mandate and the scenarios there, is that in the third mandate, to start the third mandate, you must get 61 signatures. What happens in the second mandate is, even without 61 nominations, you can still get the second mandate, meaning it's easier to form a government if you don't need to already initially have the 61 supporters to be able to then have the exclusive authority to actually form a government. Another issue with the third mandate is it's what I call the Wild West scenario, meaning with the president out of the picture, with it going to the Knesset, anybody can negotiate, meaning the exclusive authority you have in the first and second mandates don't come into play in the third mandate. There's already no parties at this point. Each one of the 120 is their own cowboy. They can do whatever they want, regardless of what is going on in terms of what their party leaders are saying. It's a lot more like the American system, right? Where you'll have one congressman who's, liberal or conservative on a certain issue and goes across party lines and votes somewhere else. Here you have a situation, and I can tell you because, I remember the last time we came to this, which was, after the second round of the elections, no one was able to get it. Everybody was trying to sign signatures to get themselves elected. Other people were trying to get other people elected. One of the more interesting scenarios was when Yehuda Glick was running around trying to sign signatures for Yuli Edelstein, who's telling him, don't do it, and there was just plenty of chaos. Of course, afterwards, we know that Bibi, deposed Edelstein as speaker. I'm sure that had something to do with it. But I'm saying that we had a situation in which, and this was very clear to a lot of people, that the third mandate was a complete mess. And by the way, that was the only time that we ever had that scenario. In the first election, we didn't have that because we legislated a second election to avoid it, to avoid even a second mandate. In the second election, that happened. In the third election, we had this weird Gantz, 50-50 government, which we're living with until this day, which is a complete catastrophe, in my, personal opinion, but also my professional opinion. That's not the way that a government is supposed to be run. And I said that, going beyond that, I just don't see, so I'll back up. Gantz agreed to that government to avoid this third mandate, this Wild West scenario. So, no one really wants to go to this place. And Rivlin is indicating that he wants to send us to this place. And like I said, the one time in Israel's history when we went to it, it was complete chaos. No one got the third mandate, and it triggered an automatic election. And by the way, out of all of the elections that we've had, this was the one where the law played itself out completely in terms of just complete dysfunction. So saying that we're going to skip the second mandate and go straight there is something that I think is very dangerous. But okay, let's see.
Forgive me. Time is running out, but yes, for us to be able to talk, and I want to ask you the $1 million question, Jeremy. You are Jeremy Sultan, Knesset insider, right-hand man to Naftali Bennett, head of the English department. What do you think is going to happen, Jeremy?
Well, you can say it's unfortunate or fortunate depending on, the way that it's going. But I think that Netanyahu is going to fail in all three, as I said. I don't think he's going to be able to convince Gideon Sa'ar, Bezalel Smotrich, or defectors. I just don't see any of those things happening. And I think a lot depends on the president. If the president gives a second mandate, I think it's very likely whoever gets the second mandate will be able to form a coalition. If we do have a scenario where this goes to the Wild West third scenario, I don't know. I'd like to say that I have confidence that something will happen. On one side, speaking to everybody, it doesn't matter if you're right or left, if you like Bibi, you don't like Bibi. Nobody wants another election, with the exception of maybe Netanyahu. Netanyahu realizes another election allows him to stay in power it gives him another chance, even if he risks losing additional seats that he had, compared to the previous election. He's able to stick around longer, and who knows? You know how you go into election, you don't know how you get out of it. Maybe he'll be able to reverse the trend. Besides him, and perhaps, some people are saying Lapid, since he went to go meet Mark Mellman, his American pollster in the States. So they're saying maybe Lapid, because Lapid realizes now that his tactic to allow all of the parties in the center left to pass the threshold by not attacking them failed, and perhaps he needs to go ahead and use the sucking the straw approach and really just throw everyone out of the threshold. But besides, I would say possibly Lapid and definitely Netanyahu, everyone else wants to avoid another election. How do you avoid another election? Like I said, I don't see it, working within the first scenario. It could work in the second scenario. How could it work in the second scenario? One way is for a different person in Likud to get it. There's the president option that a lot of people are talking about. Netanyahu says that he's against it. There was something that just came out from the legal department of the Knesset that already said at this point people are legally allowed to get nominations. She also said people that sign for more than one candidate are disqualified on both candidates. And I already know MKs that have signed for candidates for president, whether it's Bougie Herzog, whether it's Yehuda Glick. I know members of my party who have already been talking. I'm not going to say if they've signed or not, but they've been talking to some of the some of the president candidates. We're already at a point where it might already be too late to even explore the president option.
Again, referring to Netanyahu being moved over to become president so that someone else in the Likud can make a right-wing nationalist coalition instead of him. So you're saying it might be too late, that it's not even a trial.
It might be too late at this point. Look, the latest you can conduct that election is June 9th. That's the latest that you can have the president election. You need to, in order to run, submit 10 signatures of MKs. And like I said, the way that they've set it up is very much not in Netanyahu's favor. This was not like that in previous president elections that I recall, in which if you sign for one candidate, that you're disqualified and taken off from both candidates. So in that type of a situation, as we have right now, I expect that the candidates that are running are going to continue to get signatures and to go ahead and place their candidacies. I think it's going to be very difficult for Netanyahu to be able to, getting 10 signatures from Likud MKs shouldn't be a problem. But I'm saying that once you're in the dynamic already of a race, and we are right now in the middle of the dynamic of a president's race, you're not feeling that because you're not one of the 120. But the 120 MKs are the ones that choose the president. And it's very much on. And the fact that Netanyahu is not an official candidate and he's not campaigning, and it's being left to other candidates, it makes me feel that is just something that the clock is going to run out on. An additional thing that could happen is, of course, that instead of the president option, that the Likud themselves, come to some sort of arrangement with Netanyahu. Perhaps that the Likud maintains power and he's Rosh Mimshala. He's the alternate prime minister anyway, or he continues on as foreign minister, as defense minister. There's a lot of different potential scenarios that I've heard in which again you would have someone else from the Likud.
I thought that's not possible because of the court cases against him. That he's allowed to be prime minister, but he's not allowed to hold any minister position.
He's not allowed to hold any minister positions currently. Again, they're talking about the override clause. They're talking about different things that can be done. To me, again, these are all very, how can I put it? They're very original ideas to look at different things like this. But basically, and this is one of the things that is a criticism I have of the Israeli system, you can literally change Israeli law, constitutional law, whatever you want, based on what scenario you want, and be able to make it as personal as possible. So I think it's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is. And because of that, people are coming up with creative ideas, whether you can legally do this right now or not. Of course, being able to get the votes to be able to do a lot of these things are difficult. Right. In some situations, you need over 61 MKs to do so. I don't know if we're going to be in that position where we get there. But again, you asked me what's going to happen. I think that whoever gets the second mandate has a very good chance to be able to form the government. I think Netanyahu is very worried about that because, again, if he fails in the first mandate, he's going to do everything possible to not allow whoever gets the second mandate to be able to move forward, unless he becomes president or he decides to go down on his own terms. I don't see any of those things happening. Again, Bennett's doing whatever he can, whatever is possible, to be able to help Netanyahu within his task to form within the first mandate, for the simple reason that we need a government. We're the only country that didn't pass a 2020 budget. We've not passed a 2021 budget. We're in April. We're going to be in May soon. By the time, we have a vote on it, we're going to be in the second half of the year. There's the 2022 budget we have to start working on soon, and we don't have the previous 2 years to look back on. We're in a very tough situation. Of course, we're all following the news with Iran, with what's happening right now with The Hague. This is a time where we need a government, frankly, any government, if you will, or just about any government. And there's a big reason why we need to go ahead and see that stuff right now.
Final question: how attuned is Naftali Bennett to the concerns of those regarding the potential? And again, if it goes to a second mandate, very much potential for a Naftali Bennett, whether led or partnered government with Lapid, blue and white, left, and Arab parties.
I mean, if we're talking about this, again, this is a scenario, right? I know there are people who are listening and they're going to be like, okay, and they're going to want to take stuff out of context. If I'm looking at what I've heard other parties say, okay, I'm not talking about what my party's saying. What all the parties are talking about is in that type of government, Bennett would be at the top. You would have Lapid, Saar, and Gantz, and those four parties would be the basis of the government. And if you're looking at what the other parties are saying, you have Lapid, who wants to bring in Lieberman, Labor, and Meretz. And you have, for instance, people in Saar's party who have floated the idea of Smotrich and the Haredim. Instead of, again, going with Lieberman, Labor, and Meretz.
And they all won't sit together. Haredim won't sit with Lieberman, Meretz won't sit with Smotrich.
Right. So I'm saying, in this scenario, you have four base parties that would supposedly sit with either one of those scenarios, which is, Bennett, Lapid, Saar, and Gantz, right? The four of those are the basis. Right. And Lapid is pulling, supposedly, right, to go in the direction of Lieberman, Labor, and Meretz. And Saar is pushing to go in the direction, supposedly, of the Haredim and Smotrich. In that type of a scenario, if you're talking about a Bennett, Smotrich, Haredim, Saar, Gantz, Lapid government, it looks even better, if you will, from right-wing terms, than a majority of the governments that Netanyahu himself has formed. If you're looking at Ehud Barak and the Labor Party from 2009, if you're looking at Tzipi Livni with Lapid as well in 2013, if you're looking at this 50-50 one with Labor Party again, along with Avi Nissenkorn and all of those blue and white, friends over there. And I can go back to the time in the 90s where he took Kahalani and the breakaway Third Way Party that broke off of Labor, those MKs. So again, if you're looking at perspective like that, again, it's not a full right-wing government as a lot of people would want. But I think, again, if you're listening to Saar's people in that situation, that's one that would be more agreeable to a lot more right-wing voters, because again, you have a really, really strong right-wing base, where in that scenario, Lapid is the left side. He's the left extreme of that government. Right. Whereas what Lapid is suggesting is that Bennett would be the right-wing extreme.
Right-wing lead in the left-wing government.
And then you'd have Labor and Meretz along with also Lieberman. So Lapid would sort of put himself at the center of that type of a government. On this issue, I can go back to what Bennett said, not in this faction meeting, but in the last faction meeting, and that was that Israel voted right. They want a right-wing government, and that needs to be reflected in whatever government is formed.
Right. I guess it's a nice way to end, because, again, bringing it all together, again, out of the 120 parliament members to create a majority, there is a hardcore of 65 who are part of the nationalist right-wing camp. Then you have 80 or even more that can be referred to as more of the center camp. So definitely Naftali Bennett's saying that makes total sense. Even if he has to join a left-wing government, somehow it still has to reflect the right-wing desire of the electorate that wanted a right-wing government. Crazy situation. Final words to end off with?
I would say the final words are, we talked about a lot of scenarios. If it does come to the third, mandate, anything can happen. Like I said, the optimistic thing I would say for people are like, I think that was more realistic. That is less realistic. You're not putting enough weight on this or that. What it comes down to is a majority of the MKs in Knesset do not want to see a fifth election. I can tell you that with 100% certainty. If we get to that point of a third mandate, I think it's going to be very difficult to predict what exactly will happen. But I do think at the end of it, we will have a government over going to a fifth election. All these people saying fifth elections, fifth elections, fifth elections, don't buy into it. We're not at that point. And again, I really hope the president is wise enough to give a second mandate. Again, whether that's to us or to someone else, if it's someone we agree with, someone we less agree with. At this point, what Israel needs more than anything is a government. Like I said, practically every government. Obviously not a government with Balad or whatever, but practically every government. And I do believe we'll be able to avoid this fifth election.
All right. Those are definitely some promising, optimistic words for the electorate not to have to run to a fifth election in 2 years. Jeremy Sultan, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jeremy.
Thank you, Avi. It's always a pleasure.
You should have a meaningful Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, and a very celebratory Yom HaAtzmaut, Independence Day, and hopefully everyone who is listening is enjoying being enriched in the intricacies of Israeli politics to the detail level that you're able to provide. So thanks again.
Sure, thank you. And again, Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed listening to Jeremy. Again, you hear he is a lot of information, a lot of details, also in terms of the procedurally of the politics, how things work. So you really can be enriched about the different scenarios and the possibilities, etc. So I really hope you enjoyed listening to him. To end on a different but connected positive note, this whole thing has been about elections, and it gives you a big headache. Wait a second, can't our politicians just work things out? We need a government. There are plenty of people to work together. Well, you want to know something? Put everything aside. I'm a big believer, we're supposed to believe in one thing in the world, and that's God. We can't believe in anyone else. We like to trust our politicians. Politicians are politicians. Politics, it's the art of the possible. You make promises, you want to fulfill them. It's not always easy, not always possible, but the bottom line, we vote, we hope for the best. We hope our politicians do as much as possible for what we voted them to do. Bottom line, there's only one power in this universe we can put 100% trust in, and that is God. And our lives are up to us, regardless of what politicians we vote for, regardless of what government we end up with. It is up to us to lead the best lives we can, whether we agree or disagree with any government, any leader, any parties, etc. So as we go into this celebratory period, we start with Memorial Day, the somber period, then we jump into the celebratory period of Independence Day. We are living a miracle having the Jewish state of Israel, the third Jewish Commonwealth. We are a normal country like any country with our craziness of politics, but we are a miraculous country because we are miraculous people with a strong connection to God above who looks after us. I like to say that the biggest proof that God exists in the world today is the fact that the Jewish people exist and that today the state of Israel exists. We are a walking miracle that God exists. So sometimes we have to put the politics aside and hold on to what is really the most important. So with all of that, I'll say thank you once again for watching another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the land of Israel, here in the Judean Hills. Shalom, everyone, and thanks for watching.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.